and I did PC support, I didn't appreciate all of the work and effort that went in so that I could have my job as a desktop support person. See, back then, I was responsible for PC and desktop support as part of that team. And we also had, back in those early days, we also had networks back then as well. So there was a network team. And back in those early days, we didn't have a boatload of servers, as most of the centralized processing was done on huge mainframes. But in a typical environment today, we're also going to have server teams. And as incidents come up with users, something doesn't working correctly, they call somebody. Now, in many environments, that's called the help desk. In an ITIL perspective, that would be called the service desk. And if a company is providing their own IT services in-house, for a company with only one site, they probably have their service desk right there at the facility. Or if a company is outsourcing their service desk functionality, that service desk could be at the service provider or in the cloud somewhere. And we'll have a closer look at the service desk when we look at operations. So a user over here, and the end user is the individual at a customer, at a business, who is actually using our service. So if they have a problem, they've been instructed to go ahead and contact the service desk. The service desk would have some kind of a tool to track that incident that's been reported, and then they could direct it to the right resource. So ideally, as we handle incidents, we'd have some really good way of tracking it and asking questions. And as part of that system, the service desk, when they take that call, may identify that the user can't print to a local printer. And as a result, they can forward it off to the PC/desktop team, who then works on it and resolves it. And if the PC/desktop team identifies that, hey, this is not a locally connected printer, it's actually a network printer, and we think it's a network problem, not a PC problem, they might forward that back to the service desk, along with notes in the system to track exactly what's happening, and then they could forward it over to the network team, who, after they resolve the problem, could forward that information back to the service desk to track everything. And back in the early days, I was part of this PC/desktop team, and the service provider that I was working for actually got the contract to do the full service desk support for a customer. And what I didn't realize was all the work that went in to make that happen. So I'm going to draw a little dotted line here to separate the service provider and the business. And it was interesting as I watched us as a service provider bid for and win the contract to be the one-stop shop for service and support of their PCs and networking. I learned that on both sides, there's kind of executive level management, both on the service provider side and at the business/customer side. These are the individuals that negotiate and sign agreements. And what I learned is that there's a process over here on the service provider side called a BRM. Now, at the time, I did not know it was a business relationship management process. That process and a manager that might be in a role of BRM is responsible for several things in working with the business/customer. One of the aspects of the BRM process is to focus on the strategic perspective between the service provider and the business, which involves identifying the customer needs and making sure that the service provider has the ability to meet those needs. And as a result of the discussions and communications and lunches between the business relationship management process and the customer would be an SLR. SLR stands for a service level requirement. And in that SLR, it's going to state what the customer needs, what they're looking for, what kind of value they're expecting to receive. And then with those requirements, there'll be an SLA set up, which is a service level agreement. So this business relationship management process does not operate in a bubble. That BRM process is absolutely communicating with other processes at the service provider to better understand what we can deliver, how we can deliver it. Again, to make sure that the services that the customer wants can be delivered by our service provider. Or if we can't provide that directly from us, we might outsource some additional service that we can then repackage and deliver as part of our services to our customer. So an SLA is a service level agreement between the provider and the customer. And it's going to describe the IT service being delivered. It's going to document these service level targets of what's to be expected by the customer. And it's going to identify the exact responsibilities of the provider and the customer. We don't want any ambiguities. So in this documented service level agreement, it's giving the customer the warranty information, if you will, regarding that service that's being delivered. One of the elements in an SLA might be, for example, with a service desk that's being outsourced, is how soon will the customer be followed up with if there's a request? Is it 1 hour? Is it 4 hours? Is it 30 minutes, etc.? Those details will be in the SLA, or if we're using virtual services in the cloud. What's the amount of compute power that we have on those systems? Or how much bandwidth are we guaranteed from those systems out to the internet or between the systems? Those would all be documented as part of the service level agreement. So we'd have as part of our services that we're delivering metrics and indicators that could let us know regarding are we meeting our targets. And one of the temptations that we want to avoid is setting up targets or things in the SLA that cannot be measured. For example, we're going to provide excellent customer service. If we put that in the SLA as the only deliverable, excellent is in the eye of the beholder. So although there is a temptation sometimes to agree to targets that can't be adequately measured, we should resist that temptation and only put measurable targets, or in other words, things that we can measure as deliverables in the SLA, so we can prove that we did what we promised to do. Remember our acronym PDCA? Plan, do, check, and then act? We want the ability to accurately check and verify that we're meeting our service level agreements. And the purpose of the SLM, the service level management process, is to make sure that all current and planned services are delivered to the agreed to achievable targets that are specified in these service level agreements. And that's not just a one-time thing. To accomplish that, it's going to be a constant cycle of negotiating, agreeing, monitoring, reporting, and reviewing the services that we're delivering. And then if there's issues or problems, we want to be aware of those and then improve upon those. And let's imagine this from the customer perspective for a moment. If we're expecting some specific service and we've been told by the service provider, here's what to expect. If you have a problem, here's who to call. And when you call, here's how long it'll take for someone to respond and so forth. And then at the end of every week or every month, we get a report that shows exactly what happened and they're meeting those targets. It's very likely that our customer satisfaction is going to go up because the service provider is actually doing what they said they would do. And if our requirements change, we can renegotiate those and talk to the business relationship management process at the service provider and then modify our service level agreements and possibly the price as well if the service is going to go up to get that new level of service. Now, to make a service level agreement real, we need to have it signed by both parties. So from the customer perspective, from the business perspective, usually an exec level person will sign the agreement, sign the contract, and someone from the service provider with equal authority will sign it on our side as well. And that way there are clear and unambiguous expectations because we have a signed and agreed to service level agreement regarding each and every service that we're delivering. And regarding the term contract, if the service level agreement is legally binding, it may be referred to as a contract, or we could call it a legally enforceable service level agreement. Either way, we're talking about the same animal. Unambiguous, clear set expectations for both parties regarding some service that we're delivering. Now, sometimes there's a disconnect just a little bit between executive level or management level and the actual end users at a customer site. So we'd want to make sure that the customer also is communicating to the end users at their site or at their business regarding what they should expect. For example, the user needs to know who to call and what to expect when they call. And that leads us to our next challenge. Let's say a user has been given the information on who to call and what to expect as far as time frame. And let's say there is a 4-hour response time, which depending on the type of service and what we're looking at, maybe that's okay. For this example, let's use 4 hours within the window of 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, excluding holidays. So that's all spelled out in the service level agreement. So let's imagine the user has a symptom that they can't use some functionality. Maybe it's a network device, maybe it's an application on their computer, maybe it's web-based. In any event, they have some issue and they go ahead and they contact the service desk. And the service desk goes through their list of questions and then they refer it off to the desktop team because they think it's a desktop issue. And the desktop team checks it out. It's not a desktop issue. They send it back to the service desk, who then refers it to the server team based on what they discovered. So we're tracking all the details regarding this call, and it's being routed through internal groups or teams that are part of the service provider. Now, the problem is this. If we have a 4-hour response time, let's say that's, for example, for resolution or a workaround to the issue the customer is having, what if it takes 3 hours for the PC/desktop team to reply back, and it also takes another 3 hours for the server team to respond back? Is it possible that we're going to go over this 4 hours? And without a calculator, check this out, 3 and 3 is 6, we are over the 4-hour limit already. And it could get worse. For example, let's say it's a server team that identifies that this is a product or service that we're outsourcing. So maybe we're relying on a third-party vendor, and it's going to write third there in each one of those. We're relying on third-party vendors for some of those services that we're repackaging and delivering as services to our customers. They also may take some time, for example, to respond. And I'll put 3 hours on all of these. So we want to have agreements between the various parts of our service provider environment. For example, between the desktop team and the service desk, between the network team and the service desk, between the server team and the service desk. And those agreements between different parts of our same service provider company are called OLAs. An OLA is an operational level agreement. The operational level agreement between two parts of our same company, but just like between departments. or between groups or between teams at the service provider. And for our contracts with our third parties, the contracts between the service provider and third parties that they're using, those are referred to as UCs. And UC stands for underpinning contract. So the UC, the underpinning contract, defines targets and responsibilities that we're going to need from that external service provider in order for us to go ahead and meet our agreements and our SLAs with our customers. So let's do an acronym check real quick. A service level requirement has the details regarding a service that the customer needs or wants. The service level agreement is a document or set of documents regarding services that specify the deliverables and metrics that can be looked at to identify whether or not we're meeting the needs based on our agreement. SLM is referring to the entire service level management process. OLA is an operational level agreement between parts of the same service provider. And the UC, the underpinning contracts, are the agreements between the service provider and external providers that the provider is using. So if we had to draw in, for example, the service level management process into this diagram, it would probably go into this high level box here as well. So a role, the service level manager, as part of the service level management process, would be responsible to make sure that we're living up, from the service provider's perspective, we're living up to the deliverables promised that are documented in the SLA. Now, one of the tips regarding all of these agreements and contracts is that instead of creating them from scratch every single time we need one, we probably want to use some templates. So we can just take a template, modify it based on the service or the agreement that we're setting up. In the case of an SLA, based on the service we're delivering. In the case of a UC, based on the service we're receiving. And use fairly plain language so there's no ambiguity. So that an average person, for example, not a lawyer, an average person could look at it and say, okay, yes, I clearly see what's going to be delivered, and I can clearly see what the targets are to verify that it's being delivered in that fashion. And if there are some terms that maybe aren't common knowledge, the SLA could have a glossary to define those terms. And as we mentioned, the SLA needs to be signed by both parties. And then after it's in operation, the service level management process and the service level manager would be responsible for making sure that we're actually delivering that service to the customer in acceptable, documented ways. So using a template will be easier than creating it from scratch. However, not every single SLA is going to be the same. For example, we could have SLAs that are service-based, where we have an SLA that covers a single service across all of our customers and business units. It's sort of like a Big Mac at McDonald's. Here's the Big Mac. It looks the same, it tastes the same, regardless of which person is coming in and buying it. Here's the ingredients. 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. Oh my gosh. And that's the result of just years and years of marketing from McDonald's regarding that tune that's still in my head after all these years. But anyway, that's what's on a Big Mac, that you're going to get those items. Or we can have a customer-based SLA. Or if we have multiple customers, that would be plural. And a customer-based SLA is an agreement with a specific customer covering all the services that that customer uses. So it'd be a document, let's say I have 10 or 15 services in the catalog for that customer. And that way it's more convenient. All those services in a single document, signed and approved by those empowered to do so. And that way the customer, based on all the services they're receiving, knows exactly what to expect regarding all those services in the SLA. And the third is a multi-level SLA. And this applies to a type 2 service provider. I'll put that over here in the margin. For example, like you'd imagine that you and I are part of the IT business unit inside of a large corporation, and we're supporting all the other departments, providing IT services. In a multi-level SLA, we could have a corporate level SLA as an example. And that would apply to the services for every business unit, every customer inside our organization. So finance, human resources, marketing, sales, etc., they would all have the same SLA regarding the services that we're offering. Or if we have separate business units that need special attention or need special services, we could have customer level SLAs. Again, this is for a type 2 provider. So an example of this in a type 2 service provider environment would be the finance department that needs special response times. For example, if they're doing payroll and it's happening at the 15th and end of the month, that business unit may need better than the normal response time guaranteed because they've got some serious stuff to get done in a very short time frame. And other business units may have different or separate needs. So we could create customer level SLAs within our organization based on the needs of each of the business units, each of the customers. And the third ingredient that might be part of a multi-level SLA in a type 2 service provider is called service level. And I'm going to draw a line here between Big Mac and service level because that's effectively what it is. It's a service level agreement based on a specific service that we're delivering across the board. So for example, we might be providing email services to every business unit inside of our organization. And regarding that service of email, we may have a specification of the size of mailboxes, aliases that can be set up, etc., regarding that specific service. And it's the same regarding that service across our entire organization, across all the business units inside of that company. And last here in this nugget, let's talk about accountability as it relates to reporting on how we're doing. Remember, plan, do, check, and act? Well, here in the design phase regarding the service, we need to plan on those things that can be measured once it does get to operations, so that we can have reports and get metrics back regarding how well we're delivering that service and how well we're meeting these service level agreements that are currently in place regarding those services. And I've got a question for you. Let's put ourselves in the customer shoes for a moment. When would we want to get reports? When things are working correctly, or when things are having a problem, like when there's an exception, or these service level agreements have been breached or not met? When would you prefer reports as a customer? And I'm thinking to myself, I want reports in both cases. I'd like some kind of a weekly or a monthly report indicating that all the agreements have been met. And I'd also like reports that indicate when those agreements have not been met. So as part of the service level management process, and I would say also part of the business relationship management process, we're going to want to have periodic meetings with our customer, with the business, to make sure that the customer is happy from a strategic perspective, that things are going okay, and also a more detailed meeting with reports regarding how we're doing in meeting the service level agreements that are currently in place. It would also be awesome to know if there's any trends that are happening. For example, if we have a 4-hour response time as part of our service level agreement, and it's getting up to 3.5 hours, 3 hours and 45 minutes, 3 hours and 59 minutes, it'd be nice to know if there's a trend in that direction so that we can be aware of it, first of all. And secondly, as a provider, we want to make sure we're taking the steps to improve upon that so that we don't breach or break the service level agreement. And there's a name for the types of reports that we could generate that talk about a specific service, and they're called service reports. So they should be generated periodically based on what we agreed to with the customer. And it would be great if we're meeting periodically, for example, every week or every month, a few days before that meeting, to make sure those reports are in the hands of the people that we'll be meeting. Specifically from the provider, the person or persons responsible for the service level management process, as well as the person on the customer side who's going to be looking at those reports. And that way they have time to look at the details before they get into the meeting, and they'll save a boatload of time in that meeting. And if you, like me, think that time is precious, in these service reports, if they are long, like 20 or 30 pages of details, we also might include in these service reports an overview with beautiful colors indicating what's going on. For example, green is good, yellow means warning, and red, of course, is a problem. And they have a term for this. It's called SLAM, like slam. Like, boom, I just got slammed. Well, SLAM is an acronym for Service Level Agreement Monitoring. And the intention of this high-level overview that's using lots of colors to indicate how we're doing in delivering the service is meant to be an at-a-glance overview how we're doing in regards to meeting the targets that were promised in the SLA. So here in the States, I think of those colors like a stoplight, red, yellow, and green. I've heard that also referred to as red, amber, and green, which is the acronym RAG. So if you hear the term SLAM chart or RAG chart, it's just a high-level overview with colors that give a visual representation of how we're doing regarding the targets specified in the SLA. Now, if there's no documented SLA in place between the service provider and the customer and you want to start one, or we want to start one, it would be a great idea as a warm-up exercise to not pick our big problems first. For example, if we're providing internet connectivity to a customer and we know it goes out like, 2 or 3 times every week, that may not be the first item that we want to go ahead and put in the SLA. Maybe start off with the items that are working first and then build on that. For example, maybe response time through the internet to a well-known server. We have that as a first measurement. Or if we're doing cloud security and we're redirecting content through a proxy in the cloud to protect our clients, and we're measuring the delay or response through that proxy, put that in the SLA. And also, meanwhile, we'd want to make darn sure that we're fixing that issue with the internet simply going down for whatever connectivity problem is causing that, so that we can eventually put that in the SLA as well. Again, this is if we're just starting with an SLA. Start with easy, simple things that work, and then build from there. And don't include anything that cannot be measured in the SLA. And also, I should point this out, the SLA is not there to be used as a beating stick against the other party. It should be a mutually beneficial agreement between the two parties, the customer and the service provider. Because what we would like to avoid is we'd like to avoid a situation where the customer has agreed to a service level agreement with the intent of just waiting for that service provider to fail so he can not pay him. or get free additional services. And that goes back to the business relationship management, who make sure that the services that we're promising to the customer that are included in these service level requests can actually be met by the service provider. Both parties should be using the service level agreement in a mutually beneficial way to provide and consume resources, with the end result making the customer very happy about those services that they received because they perceive the value. That also goes back to making sure that the services that we're delivering are meeting the business needs of that customer. And if there are things that do come up, that hopefully we've identified trends and issues in our service reports, as part of continual improvement, we'd use an SIP. And SIP is an acronym that stands for Service Improvement Plan, which is a formal plan to improve the service that we're delivering. And as part of that service improvement plan, it might also include identifying how to tune or fix processes that we currently have in place that are currently not functioning well or need to be tweaked so that we can deliver an improved level of service to our customers.